Hello students and welcome back to Easy Dentistry. Students, at end of each lecture I have provided with a small quiz. Please type the answers in the comment box. It will help you to evaluate yourself. Today we would be studying about the premolars. The premolars are also known by the name bicuspid, but this is a wrong terminology because the word bicuspid, it indicates that the tooth has two cusps. This term bicuspid may be true for the maxillary premolars, but the mandibular premolars may have one or three cusps as well. So, the term bicuspid is not at all applicable to the mandibular premolars. Now, the premolars may develop from 4 to 5 lobes. The maxillary premolars are may mostly formed by the buccal, mesial and distal lobes as well as the lingual lobe, which forms the cingulum of the tooth, while the mandibular second premolar may be formed by five lobes. Now let us study about the maxillary premolars. The maxillary premolars are total 4 in number, 2 on the right side and 2 on the left side. Each of this side contains one first premolar and one second premolar. Similarly, on the left side there is one first premolar and one second premolar. So, the premolars, the maxillary first premolar is the fourth tooth from the midline. The first tooth is the central incisor, second tooth is the lateral incisor, third tooth is the canine. The maxillary first premolar is the fourth tooth from the midline. And the second premolar, it becomes the fifth tooth from the midline. Similarly, on the left side. Now, in this lecture, we will be first studying about the chronology, dimensions and various aspects of the first premolar, and after discussing about first premolar, we will be discussing about the maxillary second premolar. But before we begin, please subscribe to our channel and hit on the bell icon so that you don't miss any of our videos. Also share these videos with your friends. I always say that knowledge multiplies by sharing it. Please share about this channel and videos with all your friends and help them with with their studies. Also comment and tell us if you like our videos, and also give us a thumbs up. So, beginning with the maxillary first premolar, the first evidence of calcification of the maxillary first premolar is at the age of 1.5 to 1 year and 3/4 months. Then the enamel completion occurs by 5 to 6 years of age. The eruption of the tooth is at 10 to 11 years, while the root is completed at 12 to 13 years. Now coming to the dimensions of the maxillary first premolar, the cervicoincisal length of the crown is 8.5 mm. The length of the root is 14 mm. The mesiodistal diameter of the crown is 7 mm, and at the cervix it is smaller, which is 5 mm. Coming from the to the the buccolingual dimensions, the buccolingual dimension of the crown is 9 mm, while at the cervix it is 8 mm. Now the curvature of the cervical line is 1 Mesially it is 1 mm, while distally the cervical line is almost straight. It does not curves. Now, talking about the buccal aspect of the maxillary first premolar, the crown is mostly trapezoidal in shape. It resembles a trapezoid. Now, the cervical line, it shows little curvature. The mesial outline is concave. Suppose this is the mesial side and this is the distal side. The mesial outline is slight concave from the cervical line to the contact area, and the mesial slope of the cusp is longer than the distal slope. You can appreciate here the mesial slope is longer than the distal slope. Now, this feature of the maxillary first premolar is totally opposite to that of canine. In the previous lecture on canine, we have seen that the mesial cuspal slope is shorter than the distal cuspal slope. Now, this is totally opposite in the case of maxillary first premolar. The link of the lecture on the maxillary canine has been given in the description box. Please go through that lecture. Now, the distal outline of the maxillary first premolar is almost straight than the mesial outline, and the distal contact area of this tooth is more broader. Now, the buccal cusp of the maxillary first premolar is very strongly developed. It is long and pointed and it shows convexity. A ridge is present extending from the buccal cusp to the cervical line, and this this ridge is called as the buccal ridge. This prominent ridge is called as the buccal ridge. Now, mesial and distal to this buccal ridge, there are small depressions, and these little depressions, they serve as demarcation between the developmental lobes. The roots of the maxillary first premolar is shorter than that of canine, but the outline is similar to the canine. Now, talking about the lingual aspect of the maxillary first premolar, lingually the crown and root, they converge. So, the mesiodistal diameter of the maxillary first premolar lingually is less than that on the buccal aspect. Now, the lingual cusp of the maxillary first premolar is shorter than the buccal cusp. This is a very important differentiating point. The lingual cusp of the maxillary first premolar is shorter than the buccal cusp, and the lingual cusp is more smooth and it is mostly spheroidal in shape and it is relatively smooth. The mesial and the distal slopes of the lingual cusp, they meet each other at 90 degree. This lingual cusp is convex throughout, and sometimes a lingual ridge is prominent on the lingual cusp. This lingual ridge is similar to the buccal ridge and it ends into the cusp tip. This lingual ridge ends into the cusp tip. The mesial and the distal outlines are convex. They are continuous with the mesial and the distal cuspal slopes. The cervical line is regular and it is slightly curved towards the root. The lingual cusp is shorter than the buccal cusp. This I have told you, very important point in maxillary first premolar. Now, as this lingual cusp is shorter than the buccal cusp, the cusp tips of both the buccal and the lingual cusp can be seen from this aspect. The lingual portion of the root is quite smooth and the apex of the root appears to be blunt. Now, from the mesial aspect, the tooth is mostly trapezoidal in shape. The longest side of the trapezoid is towards the cervical line. This is the longest side of the trapezoid, and the shortest side is towards the occlusal surface. Two roots could be seen from the mesial aspect, the buccal and the lingual. The cervical line is very less curved. It is about only 1 mm. Now, the cusp tips, both the buccal and the lingual, are well developed and can be well appreciated from the mesial aspect. The measurement from the tip of the buccal cusp to the tip of the lingual cusp, this measurement is less than the measurement at the cervical portion. This measurement at the occlusal surface is less than that in the cervical portion. Now, the cervical line is very less curved. The buccal outline from the mesial aspect curves downwards from the cervical line, and the crest of the curvature, the maximum curvature, is at the junction of the cervical and the middle 1/3 of the crown. Now, the crest of the buccal curvature continues as a line of convexity, and it continues up to the tip of the buccal cusp. Now, the lingual outline from the mesial aspect, it is smooth, it is curved, and it extends from the cervical line up to the cusp tip. The crest of cervical line in the lingual aspect is present at the crest of curvature of the lingual aspect. It is present at the middle 1/3. Now, the tip of the lingual cusp appears shorter than the buccal cusp by 1 mm. From the mesial aspect, the cusp of the maxillary first premolar, it appears to be very sharp. Now, in the mesial aspect, there is two more important distinguishing features of the maxillary first premolar. These are, first, the presence of a developmental depression, which is called as the mesial developmental depression, which is a characteristic feature of the maxillary first premolar. Now, this developmental depression on the mesial side is present cervical to the mesial contact area and on the center of the mesial surface. On the mesial surface, there is this depression is present. This is called as the mesial developmental depression, and it is bordered buccally and lingually by the mesiobuccal and the distobuccal outlines. And this depression, it continues on the root to join the developmental depression on the root. Now, another distinguishing feature which may be present, which is definitely present, on the maxillary first premolar is the presence of a well-developed groove on the mesial marginal ridge. Suppose this is the mesial marginal ridge, a groove is present is in alignment with the developmental depression on the mesial surface. This marginal groove is continuous with the central groove, and it crosses the marginal ridge lingually to the mesial contact area. Somewhere here there is the presence of the mesial marginal groove, and this mesial marginal groove, it terminates a short distance cervical to the mesial marginal ridge on the buccal side. So, presence of this developmental depression and mesial marginal groove, this is the are the two distinguishing features on the mesial surface of the maxillary first premolar, the marginal groove. Now, coming to the distal aspect. The distal aspect of the maxillary first premolar is convex throughout and it does not have any developmental depression or grooves. Now, the curvature of cervical line is 0. That is, the cervical line is almost straight on the distal aspect, and a shallow groove may be present on the root of the distal aspect of the maxillary first premolar. A bifurcation of the root is abrupt and no developmental groove is present at the bifurcation. Now, the occlusal aspect of the maxillary first premolar may resemble a hexagon, six-sided figure. Now, the all sides of this hexagon are not equal. Suppose this is the buccal aspect, this is the lingual aspect, then the mesiobuccal side is shorter than the distobuccal side, and the mesiolingual side is shorter than the distolingual side. Now, the occlusal surface of the maxillary first premolar is circumscribed by cusps and the marginal ridges. The angle formed by the convergence of the mesiobuccal cuspal ridge and the mesial marginal ridge is 90 degree, while the angle formed by the convergence of the distobuccal ridge and the distal marginal ridge is not 90 degree, it is less than 90 degree. The mesiolingual and the distolingual cuspal ridges are confluent. They are mainly confluent with the mesial and the distal marginal ridges, and lingually a semicircle is formed. Now, talking about the details of the occlusal surface, no supplemental grooves are present on the tooth, and the occlusal surface of the maxillary first premolar is more smooth. A well-defined groove, the central groove, it divides the occlusal surface uniformly buccally and lingually. At the center of at the depth of the central groove, a sulcus is present, and from the depth of this sulcus there extends a groove towards the mesial side which ends near the mesial marginal ridge, and this sulcus is called as the mesial marginal groove, which is a very important feature of the maxillary first premolar. This mesial marginal groove, it crosses the mesial marginal ridge and it ends on the mesial surface of the crown. We have already discussed about the mesial marginal groove when we discussed about the mesial aspect of this tooth. Two collateral deep grooves joins the central sulcus. These are the mesial marginal groove, and these grooves are now two collateral deep grooves joins the central groove inside the mesial marginal ridge and the distal marginal ridge. These grooves are the mesiobuccal groove and the distobuccal groove. Now, at the junction of these grooves, there is a presence of deep pits both mesially and distally, and these pits are called as the mesial developmental pits and the distal developmental pits. Now, distal to the mesial marginal ridge, there is presence of the mesial triangular fossa. Similarly, on the distal side, there is a presence of the distal triangular fossa. Now, how to differentiate between the right-sided and the left-sided maxillary first premolar? First, consider the cuspal slope. We have discussed the mesial cuspal slope of the maxillary first premolar is longer than the distal cuspal slope. From the mesial aspect, on the maxillary first premolar, you should appreciate the mesial developmental depression and the presence of the mesial marginal groove. This mesial marginal groove, it arises from the central groove on the occlusal surface. It crosses the mesial marginal ridge and it ends on the mesial surface of the tooth. Third, you should also note the depression on the root. The developmental depression which is present on the mesial side is always deeper than that on the distal side. Now talking about the maxillary second premolar. The first evidence of calcification of the maxillary second premolar is by 2 to 2.14 year. Enamel get completed at 6 to 7 years. Eruption age of the tooth is 10 to 12 years while root completed by 12 to 14 years. Talking about the dimensions, the cervico-incisal length of the crown is 8.5 mm. The length of the root is 14 mm. Mesiodistal diameter of the crown maximum is 7 mm, while at the cervix it is 5 mm. The labiolingual dimensions of the tooth, the maximum buccolingual dimension is 9 mm, while at the cervix it is less by 1 mm, that is 8 mm. Then the buccolingual diameter, the cervical line, it curves mesially by 1 mm and distally it is 0. That is, the cervical line is almost straight. Now, the maxillary second premolar, it supplements the first premolar in function, so both of these teeth are almost similar, but the maxillary second premolar is always single rooted. The root does not show any bifurcation. Now, and the root is almost rounded. Now, the buccal aspect, the buccal cusp is not as long as the first premolar. It appears to be more rounded and not pointed. The mesial slope is shorter than the distal slope. This is the characteristic feature of the maxillary second premolar which differentiates it from the maxillary first premolar. The mesial slope of the maxillary second premolar is shorter than the distal slope, and the buccal ridge is not as prominent as the first premolar. Rest all aspects, that is the mesial outline, distal outline, it is quite similar to the maxillary first premolar. From the lingual aspect, now in the maxillary second premolar, both the buccal and the lingual cusp is of the same length. As we have seen in the maxillary first premolar, the lingual cusp is smaller than the buccal cusp, but in the second premolar, these two are equal. Now, from the mesial aspect, the buccal and the lingual cusps appear to be of same length, and they are shorter than that of the maxillary first premolar. Now, the distance between the cusp tip of the second premolar is more, so this widens the occlusal surface. No developmental depression is present on the mesial side and no marginal groove. The developmental depression which we have discussed in the first premolar and the presence of the marginal groove which was present in the maxillary first premolar is totally absent from the second premolar. The root shows presence of a shallow developmental depression. From the distal aspect, the distal root depression is deeper than that on the mesial root, and no other distinguishing feature may be seen on the distal root. From the occlusal surface, the occlusal surface appears to be more rounded. The central groove is shorter, and irregular multiple supplementary grooves arise from this central groove, and this gives a wrinkled appearance to the occlusal surface of the maxillary second premolar. Sorry, this is the occlusal aspect. Now, how to differentiate between the right-sided from the left-sided maxillary second premolar? First, look at the cuspal slope. The mesial one is shorter than the distal one. So, look at the cuspal slopes. The shorter one becomes the mesial slope, and then you can determine the side of the tooth. Second point you should remember is the depression on the root. Distally, the depression is deeper than the mesial one. Now, how to differentiate first premolar from the second premolar? There are 7 points of differentiation. Let us see one by one in detail. The first is the cuspal slope. Very important point. In the first premolar, the mesial cuspal slope is longer than the distal cuspal slope, while it is opposite in case of the maxillary second premolar. Now, the cuspal length. In first premolar, the buccal cusp is longer than the lingual cusp, while in the second premolar, both are of equal length. Now, the mesial developmental depression is present on the mesial aspect of the maxillary first premolar, and it is totally absent on the maxillary second premolar. Also, the mesial marginal groove is present on the first premolar and absent from the second premolar. Now, the depression of roots. On the first premolar, on the mesial aspect of the root, the depression is deeper than the distal aspect, while opposite is true in the case of second premolar. The occlusal outline of the first premolar is angulated and smooth, while the second premolar it is rounded, and due to the presence of numerous supplemental grooves, it also appears to be wrinkled. Now, the furcation in the roots. The first premolar, there is a furcation present in the root, dividing the root into a buccal and a lingual smaller roots, while in the second premolar there is a single strong root present and no bifurcation. Now, time for quiz. First question: mesial marginal groove is present on which tooth? Second question: in the first premolar, which cuspal slope is longer? And the last question, the mesial developmental fossa is characteristic feature of which tooth? So here we complete the discussion on maxillary premolars. The next lecture will be uploaded soon, which would be on the mandibular premolars, both first as well as second. Please subscribe to our channel. That's all for now. See you soon and happy studying.